So the main changes since last evening, the forecast track has indeed shifted a little bit west, and Laura is now a hurricane forecast to be Category 3 at landfall. So stronger than it was forecast for yesterday. That has led to the hurricane watch area to be expanded, and excuse me, many of those watches now have become warnings, as well as storm surge. So this bar chart is meant to give a sense of the hazards, the relative hazards for this event. As we know, every storm is different. The way we're thinking, the greatest threat here is from wind and storm surge, and that assumes a track into our area. The storm is moving quite quickly. Rainfall rates will be high, though, along and near the track. So there could be some flash flooding, but it is moving quickly, so not the extreme rainfall amounts we've had with some of our other storms. And tornadoes will be more prevalent on the right-hand side of the track, so shouldn't be a big tornado producer for our area. And of course, the seas and marine zones will be okay. Can you hear me? I'm hearing that people are not seeing the slides advance.
Yeah, I hear you, Dan, but my slide seems to be stuck. Okay, now it's moving.
Okay. Hopefully there's no
It's
glitch.
just really slow for the slide to go forward.
All right. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. So there are the slides I was referring to. Wind and surge, probably the predominant hazards. Marine also very significant. Very high seas and winds in the marine waters, the adjacent marine waters. Tornadoes, not so much, and rainfall, flooding, kind of a lower threat, but certainly there also. And if you should see the next slide, if there's more problems, just let me know. So here's a look at the satellite view of Laura. You can see it's emerged off of Cuba now in the open waters of the Gulf, has intensified to a hurricane now, and forecast to track across the Gulf and strengthen before making landfall. Hang on a second. And so now it's in that strengthening phase we've been talking about. One change, I've highlighted some of the changes from yesterday. Laura now forecast to make landfall as a Category 3 storm. Yesterday it was a 2. And the location we thought maybe closer to the border yesterday, more likely, but now the expectation has shifted into Texas as well, a little bit further into Texas. Life-threatening storm surge flooding is expected near and right of the landfall location. Very, very dangerous winds as well, expected near the center track. Track has shifted west. Can't rule out additional shifts in the track over the next day or so. And many of those watches that we talked about yesterday have been upgraded to warnings as we get closer to the event. Here's a look at the forecast cone. Hopefully you're seeing that. Hopefully the slides are advancing. You can see the current location there at 10 a.m. The M on this map indicates a major hurricane, meaning Category 3 or greater. So we're looking at a very strong hurricane making landfall. Really, the center could track anywhere in or near the cone. So notice Galveston Bay tucked right in there on the left-hand side of the cone. We do have some solutions that actually make a more direct impact toward the Galveston Bay area, or perhaps just east. And so we need to prepare for a direct impact from a major hurricane. What are those winds looking like at landfall? 115 miles per hour sustained, 140 mile per hour wind gusts. That puts it on the Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. And like I say, a direct hit is possible anywhere in or near that cone. Within the cone is basically will verify about 2/3 of the time. And so I think the cone gives us a pretty decent idea here of the range of possibilities of the center track. It's important not to focus on that line in the middle, not on those dots on the page, more on the cone itself. Don't focus on that skinny black line. Here's a look at the warnings. There may be an issue with the offshore warnings, but you still get the idea here. The counties in red are in a tropical storm warning. The counties in pink are in a hurricane warning. And that hurricane warning, it's hard to see on this display, does include Galveston Island, Bolivar Peninsula. And we'll talk more about those warnings in a moment. You can also see the warning extent on this map as well as the red line there. Really from San Luis Pass all the way over into Louisiana. There is actually a tropical storm watch that extends from San Luis Pass further down the coast to Freeport. So that's to give a little bit of a buffer there on the edges of that hurricane warning. Talking about the wind hazard now, there's our tropical storm wind speed probabilities now very high, 90% or greater for a large area extending from Galveston Bay over toward Lake Charles. And 70% or higher, that includes Galveston Bay. So very likely we're going to see tropical storm force winds no matter how that storm tracks. Just depends on if we'll get the extreme winds closer to the center, if the center tracks into our area. 58 mile per hour winds. As Lance mentioned last night, this might be a good indication of where you might see power outages, for example. And fairly high values, 50% or higher, again, extending from about Galveston Bay over to central Louisiana. And then dropping off as you go farther down the coast. Keep in mind, if it were to shift, the forecast to shift west, this whole pattern would shift west as well. Then the hurricane force wind probabilities, still greatest along the border there of Texas and Louisiana. But those values above 30% extending down to Galveston Bay are significant for hurricane force wind point probabilities. So we do have that potential for hurricane force winds really anywhere in that hurricane warning area. Timing hasn't really changed much the last few days. Still looking at the arrival of tropical storm force winds, most likely Wednesday evening. Could see it a few hours earlier, maybe Wednesday afternoon, but Wednesday evening most likely for the onset of tropical storm force winds. Now, I know there's been some questions from emergency managers about timing for their area, wind timing, and I'll demo HurrAvac at the end and show you how you can create a wind timing report for your area very easily. Storm surge, these numbers have come up since yesterday with a stronger storm and a track a little bit further to the left. We're now looking at 2 to 4 feet for Freeport to San Luis Pass. I'll show you in a moment. There's a storm surge, well, 3 to 5 feet, excuse me, from San Luis Pass around Galveston Bay over to Port Bolivar. 3 to 5 feet of surge. And then 6 to 9 feet from Port Bolivar to High Island. So for our area, Bolivar Peninsula is the hardest hit with that 6 to 9 feet of surge expected. But that's significant surge as well around Galveston Bay, along the island, and even down to Freeport a little bit less. The storm surge warning here in sort of a darker shade of sort of rose color is where there is the possibility, really the danger of life-threatening storm surge. So you see that includes Galveston Island, Bolivar Peninsula, and then areas around Galveston Bay, extending to the east. Notice the inland extent as well. As we know, For some of our low-lying areas, such as coastal Chambers County, that surge penetrates pretty far inland. And then you can see that surge threat as you go farther to the east into Louisiana. I'm going to show you a series now of potential storm surge inundation maps. These are planning tools based on Laura's track and the possibilities of kind of different tracks sort of closer to the cone. These are based on not the 10 a.m. advisory, but the 4 a.m. And so the new version of this will be out in the next half an hour or so, and the numbers may well be just a bit higher than you see here. But this gives you an idea of the potential inundation above ground, the flooding above ground level. You can see the legend there. The blues are 1 to 3 feet, the yellows 3 to 6, the oranges 6 to 9. So let's go ahead and zoom in on some different areas. Here we're looking at Bolivar Peninsula in Chambers County. You can see a lot of 6 to 9 foot above ground level flood inundation there. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see these numbers come up a tad with the next products that we receive shortly. So very, very dangerous situation there as far as storm surge flooding. On the right-hand side, we can see Galveston Island, and you can see quite a bit of 3 to 6 foot above groundwater, especially on the bay side. Higher parts of the island, not as much. But it's important to point out that if we do get a shift with a more direct hit, these numbers would go considerably higher. This is based on the majority of tracks tracking east of the bay. And then we look down the coast there at San Luis Pass and then parts of Brazoria and Matagorda County, and there still are some 3 to 6 foot values, but they tend to be lower as you go farther down the coast. So that's why the storm surge warning is based on is positioned where it is. This is not the category-based meows we looked at earlier. These are based on the actual storm, Patricia, but they're based on the 4 a.m. advisory. So that's why when we get the 10 a.m. version of this with a stronger storm and a slightly farther left track, I would expect the numbers to actually go up from here. You can actually view these products at hurricanes.gov. You'll see the updates coming in the next half an hour or so. We talked about this yesterday. Seas will be an issue too. You can see a large area of greater than 15-foot seas tracking across the Gulf with the storm. And some of those higher seas start to get into our coastal waters Wednesday evening as the higher winds arrive as well. As always, we'll see some large swell coming well out ahead of the storm. And so you would actually expect to see a bump in the surf during the day tomorrow, as well as some rise in the water levels. The way these tides should behave, what we're showing here are sort of peak tide levels. We should start to see the waters rise during the day tomorrow, and then rise quickly tomorrow evening as the storm comes in. And again, that assumes a track toward the area. It's a complicated situation as well. Even if the storm were to track east of the area, we can get a situation where the water comes in, and then we start to get more of a north wind, and that can actually bring some bay water onto the bay side of these barrier islands. So even if that track is a little bit to our east, and like I said earlier, a direct hit is still possible, we will have some flooding issues. And then finally, the rainfall forecast. Again, this is not the primary concern with this storm, but we do expect a band of 4 to 8 inches with locally 12 near and to the right of the track of the storm. So if it does track to our east, we won't get very much rain as much rain out of it. We'll get some, maybe 2 to 4 inches. If it were to track right on us, we would have more like 4 to 8 maybe even locally higher, along with those other hazards that would be worse as well. Excessive rainfall outlook. This is intended to show you where the flash flood risk is for Laura. And again, you see the greater risk. They're right there along the Texas-Louisiana line in the red, and also much of western Louisiana. The yellow also kind of a moderate risk, or a slight risk, excuse me, and that does extend into our area. Again, that'll depend on how that storm tracks. And then lower chances of flash flooding as you get farther to the west and farther inland. So just to sum up, life-threatening storm surge is going to be likely near and right of the storm's track. Dangerous, life-threatening winds as well, near the center of the track, especially in the ring around the eye, which is the eye wall. So we're confident in that, that we're going to have a major hurricane with big impacts. What's still to be determined is the exact track of the center. And but we're close enough now, and there's enough uncertainty. We sort of need to plan on a direct hit, perhaps, for a left of cone track. The storm is moving fairly quickly compared to some previous storms, so flash flooding is still possible, but definitely a secondary threat compared to surge and damaging winds. The watches that were issued yesterday afternoon have mostly been upgraded to warnings with this advisory, and the hurricane warning area has expanded west compared to what we were looking at last evening. Now includes coastal Harris and Galveston Island. And then we have storm surge watches from San Luis Pass up the coast. Warnings, excuse me. Worst case scenario would be a direct hit from this major hurricane. And like I say, I showed you the wind forecast earlier, gusts to 140 miles per hour, considerably higher surge than we showed on the guidance we presented just now. So unfortunately, that's the situation we're dealing with. Again, if it were to track further east, which is still a possibility, we wouldn't see those extreme impacts, but we are definitely under the gun with a more westerly track. So that's what I have. Go ahead and stop the recording, and we will get to questions.